in academic research, right? Between 1923 and 1929, a Chicago-based firm, Mather and Company, produced hundreds of motivational workplace posters to be hung in offices and factories around the country. For those of you who don't know, this was a period of economic optimism and low unemployment in the United States. Many of these posters produced by Mather and Company express ideas that one expects to see in a workplace poster, such as having a positive attitude, as you can see, and being punctual. Others celebrate the notion of cooperation using the language of teamwork. This is not surprising, given that the 1920s have been called the golden age of sport and saw a proliferation of company-based sports teams. At first glance, these posters seem charmingly banal, the kind of workplace rhetoric designed to motivate and inspire workers to basic good behavior. But considered in light of the labor history of the period, a different, surprising perspective emerges. Mather and Company produced these posters at a time when labor, especially radical labor, was weak. Radical labor groups such as the Industrial Workers of the World, one of their very famous images pictured here, had faced harsh governmental persecution for their opposition to World War I, as well as further oppression during the Red Scare of 1919. Despite the diminished power of labor in this period, and a discrediting of labor values generally, the Mather posters deployed language intimately associated with the labor movement. Much of this language was that of the radical fringe, who had, only a few years earlier, been branded traitors. Notions of solidarity, mutuality, and teamwork are featured repeatedly in the Mather posters. While expressions of individualism and success through personal striving do appear in some, many others celebrate communalism and success through cooperative efforts. An underlying assumption of the labor movement was that through collectivism, the asymmetrical power of worker and employer could be mitigated. Eugene Debs, speaking at the founding convention of the Industrial Workers of the World in 1905, asserted that as workers, we depend absolutely upon each other. We must get close together and stand shoulder to shoulder. We know that without solidarity, nothing is possible, that with it, nothing is impossible. It is this notion of mutuality that the Mather posters also expressed. Altogether Full expresses a powerful idea of teamwork. It depicts masculine solidarity as well as masculine sensuality. Giving up or slumping, what we might call slacking, are wrong according to the poster, not merely because these behaviors reveal weak character, but because of how they impact one's fellow workers. Pull together when you want to win asserts the power of working together and cooperating with the group in order to achieve success. By utilizing this rhetoric, business interests claim the moral ground that labor had staked out. Not only does this poster make an argument about the right kind of worker, it also makes an argument about the right kind of man. Think I and you work alone doesn't articulate ideas of heroic individualism, as one might expect in an era when Charles Lindbergh was achieving what had a generation earlier been inconceivable. The language and imagery of this Mather poster assert that the way to succeed is through cooperation and mutuality. One helps another, and both progress. The man in the poster struggles up the mountain, but his individual striving is hopeless because he attempts to do alone what can only be achieved through cooperation. The poster argues that workers who think only of themselves are doomed. It is only through teamwork that difficult tasks can be accomplished. An articulation of this same idea can be found in the IWW anthem, Solidarity Forever, written in 1915 and sung to the tune of John Brown's Body, which I will not sing for you today. You're welcome. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble force of one? But the union makes us strong. It is not surprising that the industrial workers of the world celebrate solidarity in their anthem, but it is unexpected in a motivational workplace poster. Another celebration of mutuality can be found in the team worker. The idea of mutuality and group identity is once again deployed in an attempt to shape the idea of the right kind of worker, one who is always busy, always working with others, always getting things done. The final line offers an unexpected twist. For all is for yourself affirms the importance of individual achievement, yet places individual achievement firmly in the realm of communalism. Although the language of the poster touches on individual success, the nonverbal element of the bumblebee and the language of always helping others offers a clear message of the power and value of group identity and solidarity. The animal depicted is not a lone wolf atop a mountain or a mighty stallion thundering across the plain, but rather a bumblebee who works industriously and in harmony with his fellow laborers for the greater good. For all is for yourself also echoes the rallying cry of the IWW. An injury to one is an injury to all. Even posters that disparage labor organizing do so based on the values of labor ideology itself. The figure in Dissatisfied Men, who relentlessly harangues the crowd when trying to stir up discontent, is criticized in the poster because, among other things, he thinks so much about himself he is always miserable. In the world of the Mather posters, it is the socialist, or the communist, or the union organizer who is too individualistic. It is surprising that individualism is grounds for critique at all in this period between the Progressive era and the New Deal era. The 1920s were a period when, as historian Michael Parrish has argued, the country, weary of lofty idealism and disillusioned by war, turned to individual concerns. Not surprisingly, a negative view of individualism is central to the IWW philosophy as well. An example can be found in a comment by IWW activist Joe Hill. He is said to have described the type of worker who wouldn't organize as an I guy, contrasting such a person with members of the IWW who, he said, happen to be we guys. Not only did the Mather posters deploy labor language and ideology, but they evoked the visual symbols of the IWW as well. This Mather poster frames workplace conflict as petty arguing that wastes time, kills teamwork, stalls progress, and neatly deflects the idea that there could be legitimate worker complaints. The image of the cat is interesting in particular. It doesn't simply refer to fighting like cats and dogs, but rather represents something very specific about class politics. This famous IWW image, sometimes called Sab Cat, or my favorite, Sabotabby, is the symbol for sabotage, which essentially meant to work slowly or to disrupt industrial production without calling a full-fledged strike. To the IWW, the sabotage cat evoked a powerful tool available to workers who might not have had other means of protest available to them. Between 1917 and 1919, newspapers reporting on the IWW trials repeatedly connected the black cat symbol and sabotage. I found over a dozen such articles in my research this summer. One example from the New York Times reported that the black cat with outstretched claws, so universally used by the organization, is indeed a fitting symbol for a revolutionary society which has openly declared again and again during the present trial that its purpose is unceasing warfare to exterminate the wage system and seize the industries of the nation. The Mather poster utilizes the iconography of the IWW, but dramatically reshapes its meaning. The poster delegitimizes workplace complaints altogether, arguing that unhappy workers merely are troublemakers or have bad attitudes. The French bulldog, who one assumes represents the company or management, stares plaintively at the viewer, pleading for harmony and goodwill, while a cat, stridently aggressive, refuses to compromise and be sensible. one can look at these posters and see merely old-fashioned exhortations to good workplace habits and behavior. But my research suggests that many of the seemingly innocuous expressions of goodwill and teamwork are in fact highly political and strategic. By redefining the very meaning of teamwork, mutuality, and solidarity, the Mather posters appropriate the language of labor, but dramatically reshape its meaning. Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
I'm curious to know why you think that this publishing company decided to appropriate the labor movement's, I guess, symbolism and their like themes of collectivism and communalism. Do you think they felt that there's some stock in what the movement was going for, or that they were gaining in popularity for some reason?
I think there are a lot of reasons. It's a really good question. I think there's sort of a moral tug of war about sort of the very nature of work and workers and identity in this period. I didn't have time to go into it today, but the post-war period saw strikes of millions of people. There were bombs going off at the Attorney General's house in 1919. It was a very kind of chaotic, scary period, I think, for capital, for people invested in that system. And so there were a number of strategies to sort of deal with that. Ford and the $5 day, you could think of, trying to sort of provide a better standard of living without really changing the dynamics of the economic system. And I suspect that this is sort of part of that. Yeah, but I think that there's more research will come this semester as I start crafting my thesis.
Thanks.
Yes.
It's really interesting.
No, you went from here and then one back.
It's an interesting presentation, and definitely some striking parallels between the labor statements and the posters. So I was wondering if there's any other kinds of evidence that this is a kind of an overt strategy to prevent strikes and things like that, versus then what you say, the kind of generic kind of platitudes. And so things like what kinds of companies, do we know who was buying these and displaying them? Do we know if Mather and Company was making very much money, and if that changes over time, and whether their production, I think you stop in 1929, but does their production, if they survive, change after the crash?
So let me see. The production stops in 29 with the crash. Companies are not concerned with motivating workers or keeping the workers that they have. So I don't know sort of how profitable that they were. I know that they did claim tens of thousands of clients. They might have been sort of inflating that to bolster their own image, but they do sort of list in some of their advertisements I found on the Hagley on a digital archive a long list of many both different kinds of companies and number of companies. And I think moving forward it would be very interesting to sort of look into if there are records sort of related to how they were used in different workplaces. And something that I think is really interesting about the posters is that they were used in offices and in factories. And in some way that's kind of almost appropriating the most fundamental idea of labor itself, which is that there's like a class of workers who all have something in common. And I don't think that anybody would argue that somebody working in a steel mill has a lot in common in their sort of day-to-day work experience as somebody working in an office as a clerk. But because the posters were used in this way, it does sort of create this sort of fictive worker, but with a very sort of different political agenda than I think labor would sort of pursue.
Time for one more? Yes, please.
Yeah. I know my question is outside the scope of what you've done, but
My favorite kind.
Yes. Following on the two questions that have just been asked, do you have any idea how workers responded to these? Did they take them seriously? Did they see them as a joke? Do you think what effect do you think these posters had on the workers themselves during that time period?
I think that's an excellent question, and I wish I had an answer. If I could sort of look in my crystal ball or maybe sort of create something on the spot. But honestly, I can't really say how they were received. I think that might also be another line of inquiry, although I'm not sure that that would be, that there would be records along those lines. But definitely would be an interesting sort of way to enrich my analysis. Is there like a mustache drawn on the smile guy, or?
Yeah.